Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's talk, Lions of Brazil, Mônica Carnesi, Golden Lion Tamarins, and Storytelling. I'm fortunate enough today to be joined by children's book author, librarian, and hot chocolate aficionado, Mônica Carnesi, the author and illustrator of the newly released picture book, There's a Lion in the Forest, which I feel like always needs a point. Hi, Mônica.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Before we can get into our conversation, I have a small amount of housekeeping to do, so I hope everyone watching will please bear with me. This presentation is brought to you by the Children's Literature Research Collection, which is part of the Special Collections Division of the Free Library of Philadelphia. The Free Library of Philadelphia's Children's Literature Research Collection is one of the premier centers for the study of children's literature in the United States. CLRC engages the public about the importance of children's literature in our culture and society. We expand the knowledge base of our patrons through research support, and we foster new ideas through displays and exhibitions. And you can learn more about all of that by visiting us on the website at freelibrary.org/CLRC. And there's an Easter egg, because if you look at our logo of the dog knee-high reading comic book, Mônica created that for us. So a little bit of extra love from you today. You can also see past programs as well as activities, games, and fun in our special collections repository, which is listed at bit.ly/fun with FLP spec call. And that is a combination of the Children's Literature Research Collection material, but also the material across all of our special collections. And you can learn more about those by visiting us at freelibrary.org/special collections. When I'm no longer in the hot seat, I will put all these links into the chat for everyone watching. I'm going to talk a little bit about some upcoming programs and exhibitions. We have a new exhibition opening soon in March. The dream of flying through the skies and looking down with a bird's eye view has captivated people for centuries. After mythological tales and folklore encouraged humankind to consider the science of flight, the skyways opened to new adventures for communication and travel. Hot air balloons were used for spectacle, sport, and to see our world from a whole new angle. Air travel fundamentally altered our ability to communicate as mail crisscrossed the skies and people travel for business and leisure. You can learn all about this and more in Up Above, Looking Out at the Skies, which will be opening on the second floor of Special Collections at the Parkway Central on March 7th. It's a collaboration from the Children's Literature Research Collection, the Print and Picture Collection, and the Map Collection. The William B. Dietrich Gallery on the third floor of Parkway Central Library will host an exhibition curated by Philadelphians from around the city. It includes one-of-a-kind art and artifacts from 1,000 years of Muslim culture, alongside treasures and ephemera from the homes of Philadelphia Muslims. In the Path of Islam is a place to share stories of Islam and to celebrate Philadelphia as a center for Black American Muslims. The exhibition will be complemented with traveling exhibitions that show off the Free Library's largest Quran, a collection of indigenous Muslim dolls designed here in Philadelphia, and ancient and modern Arabic calligraphy. The tours will be going from our branches and into schools and various other locations upon request. Oop, I hit an extra slide, sorry about that. Later today at 11 o'clock following this, we have the first program for the upcoming exhibition, where you'll join Imam Nuya Abdullahi as he discusses African origins of Islam. Imam, he's currently the Imam of the Masjid Al-Wasatiyah Wal Itidal. He was born and raised in Accra, Ghana, West Africa. And he studied in Al-Azhar University in Cairo and holds a master's degree in Islamic studies from the American Open University. You can find out more at the link, which I'll throw into the chat. And finally, our next children's literature program will be on March 26th, which is a Saturday at 10 o'clock, just like this. And we'll be chatting with the life of the party, Amy Ignatow. Amy is the author and illustrator of the Odd series, the Jedi Academy chapter books that focus on the character Christina Starspeeder, and the Popularity Papers, which are pictured. This week, Variety reported that the Popularity Papers are being turned into a live action series for Canadian television with international distribution through the BBC. So we'll learn a little bit about Jedis and television, and maybe we'll hear some Hollywood gossip along with Amy's process.
Hey, That's
Okay,
great.
isn't that amazing? Yeah, I'm really happy
That
for
is
her.
great news.
Okay, so thanks for bearing with me. Now on to There's a Lion in the Forest, which I love saying. There's such a great captive title. The book, it was released on the 22nd, and it has been praised by School Library Journal as fun and informational at the same time. It has a solid message for the intended audience. You need to take time to gather all the evidence before you can leap to conclusions. And the story was also named a Junior Library Guild selection for 2022. So welcome, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking about picture book making. So
yeah, but first I want to, the award, that is a really big thing. What did you do to celebrate the announcement?
it was really, I was so excited. This is my third book, but it was the first time the Junior Library Guild selected. I'm not really big on social media, but I did put it on my Instagram, and I told everybody I knew, because this is really a wonderful news. It means that they will be, Junior Library Guild is really big, especially with smaller libraries and school libraries, and that means that more people will get to see There's a Lion in the Forest. So looking at my screen, there's a picture of Little Dog Lost, but yeah, no, that was the best news.
That is fantastic. Well, let's start with Little Dog Lost, which was your first, which I have behind me. We have also Beatrice and Bear. And I think one of the things that I love about your books is they're all so different, but they kind of live in the same world where they're fictional, but they have that nonfiction hook. So like a caregiver or a really curious reader has avenues to learn more. How do you find the inspirations for those stories?
So I started sharing my screen so we can talk about that. Yes,
Great.
You're absolutely right. My books, they have some common elements. I mean, they all have animal characters because I love drawing animals. And they all have, like, the way that they came about, they always start with an illustration. I think I'm a visual thinker. So the book begins when I think of an illustration and an image. And that's how things start. Now, Little Dog Lost happened. Let me move into Little Dog Lost happened. It's actually the first book. It's based on a true story. So the story was already there. I heard the story on NPR, and it was about this amazing story of a little dog back in 2010 in Poland who was found floating on an ice floe in the Vistula River. And despite efforts by people to try to rescue him, they couldn't. And against all odds, the impossible happened. He actually floated for 2 days all the way to the Baltic Sea. And he was rescued at the last possible minute by this research ship, the Baltica, that spotted him and went above and beyond to rescue Baltic, and then eventually adopted him, and he became a member of the crew. So it's just like, it's the perfect story. But even
and you just saw this on you just saw the story on NPR, and that got the gears turning.
Not at first. It got me captivated, and I kept thinking about the story because I just love animals and I love dogs. But it wasn't until some weeks later, I was participating in something called Illustration Friday, which was it's a very friendly prompt-based challenge every week for you to come up with a drawing based on a word. And a few weeks after I heard about Baltic, the word was adrift. And the first thing that came to mind was to do an illustration of a dog adrift on an ice floe. He doesn't even look like Baltic, because I just thought. And that's when I started to think that this could be a picture book. At the time I was working with my agent. We were trying to come up with stories, and I wasn't coming up with the right story that was kind of clicking with me. And when she saw this illustration, she contacted me and she said, I think this is it. This is your picture book. And I thought, you're right. But it didn't start when I first heard the news. It started with that illustration. And so Little Dog Lost, the story was already there. You had the arc of the story already from beginning to end. And it was just a question of then translating that into the picture book format, into the 32-page format.
For people who are interested in getting into illustration, where can they find prompts like that? Who generated the prompt that led to Little Dog Lost?
I believe this Illustration Friday still exists. this was, this is pre-social media. Like this is when blogs were really big. So, and so you would get them. So with Illustration Friday was a blog. I don't participate on that as frequently anymore, but now with Instagram, you always find a lot of, there's Inktober, and there's also, draw this in your style. You just find ways. It's a great way for you. Like I wanted, at that time, I was trying to improve my portfolio, make it a little bit more. I kept on just drawing the same things over and over again. And these prompts are a great way to have you think about different ways, different things to illustrate and add different characters. So I think now you can see a lot of that, not so much in blogs anymore, but definitely Instagram, which is more visual social media.
Right. And it's nice too, because if people are not illustrators or don't want to become illustrators, they could still follow and see as people hashtag all the drawings. So you at least get a real thrill of seeing like, oh, wow, how did this person interpret this prompt? It's
true. So Little Dog Lost came out, and after that, my second book, so it was the night, so it happened that it had that nonfiction aspect because it was based on a true story. So the second one, my second book, was Sleepover with Beatrice and Bear. And it followed, so this is totally fictional, totally in my head, although it was, again, because of a prompt that I never actually did do, but I remember the prompt was hibernation. And I remember thinking of this idea of a rabbit showing up at a bear's cave, thinking that hibernation was a sleepover. And I just thought that was a funny concept, but I didn't. The thing with Illustration Friday is that you didn't have to. It's a very free, you do it whenever you can. But the idea stuck in my mind. And when it was time to come up with a different story, I kind of remember that. I remember this, an idea of this little illustration of the bear and the bunny, kind of cozying up with blankets, and the bunny has no idea what she's getting into because she still thinks it's just a sleepover. And from that, I went, the photograph shows some of the steps. I start with the illustration again. That illustration is the one that prompts me with the idea. And then I go back into doing more drawings, starting writing a manuscript, doing thumbnails, and then kind of in this way, putting the arc together of the story, how they met, how the disappointment of not being able to actually hibernate, and coming up with a solution at the end. So by accident, I wasn't necessarily thinking of doing a book that talked about hibernation, but it does work. It's helpful in picture books if a picture book have two layers. So you have a layer that's entertaining, but it has a second layer that can also be used in an informational or school setting.
Right. You mentioned thumbnails, which for people who are unfamiliar, I can see in your illustration, you have some thumbnails, but can you just tell us a little bit about what a thumbnail is and how you would use it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So here's, so usually thumbnails are and I'll show you more, but let me show you. So I use something like this, which is the same one. It's basically, the picture books are 32 pages, and that's that they don't have to be, but that's the standard size because that's the cheaper way to print. They are, a 32-page picture book is made of 2 signatures, and a signature is a large piece of paper that can be printed and folded into 16 pages. So when you put those 2 together, it becomes a 32-page book. And so you don't want to go a little too less or a little too more than that, because you're going to waste paper, unless you're writing a book, and usually nonfiction books tend to be longer, but then you plan to be able to use the full page. So what the thumbnail does is that it helps you think of the story in a way that's going to fit in those 32 pages. And it helps you think then of rhythm, of pacing, and in picture books, most importantly, page turns, because that's what keeps the reader engaged with the book, thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And you keep on turning the page to find out. So I think even if you're not an illustrator, if you're just a writer, doing something like this, just using, you don't need to draw, but using something like this to put the pages, it helps you break up the story so that you are consciously separating the text, so you don't have too much text on one page and not as much on the other. There's no set way to do it. Some books will break, you can always break the rules, but that's basically the standard way to do it, and kind of helps you plan your story. And when you're ready to show it to an agent or to an editor, it shows that you understand how picture books work, how they're made.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of great advice in there, and especially, just the idea of considering the page turn. You see a lot of picture books where you're reading through and you think like, oh, this book would have been so much better if they just would have moved this to the next page. So you have that moment of drama when you're reading it before you turn the page to go through.
The page turn it's the same thing as in a novel, right? Novels, some great novels, this chapter always ends with a hook. When you're like, it ends in a way you're like, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen to this character? So it kind of push you to to stay in the book, to stay within that world and not get distracted, right? So.
And you're very fortunate, since you're the author and illustrator of these. You have the ability to decide where your text is going to go and where your illustrations are going to go. It's, someone who would be just writing a picture book and submitting the manuscript, they may not necessarily know where their words are going to end up on the pages.
It's true.
But if they use that system, they would at least have an idea when talking to their agent or talking to an editor of it. It helps people get inside your brain to think, how are you visualizing this flow?
I think, when you're just a writer, and it's not just, it doesn't, you have it, the picture books are always a very collaborative effort. Even if you do the words and art, like I do the illustrations, you still work very collaborative with your editor, with your art director, with the book designer. If you're just the writer, you are still going to be working primarily with the editor. And you just have to have, you have to have that trust that they are going to find the right illustrator for your story. And you have to, I think one thing that is different is that you really do have to give up some control, because you have to allow the illustrator to do their part and to bring, to elevate the story, because picture books really are this perfect combination, perfect marriage of words and art. And as a writer, you're there to create the story, but you have to leave up space to let the illustrator bring their own take on the story as well.
So let's talk about illustration for a moment, because in getting ready for our conversation today, I was able to sit down again, and I don't think I've ever sat down and read all three of yours back to back to back. And the thing that really struck me was how much, the illustrations are all in the same family. I would identify them all as being yours, but the layout and the way you've done them is they're family, but they're like cousins, right? Because Little Dog Lost, and I hope people will be able to see this. When I'm looking at the book itself, so many of your illustrations are going east to west. It's kind of like as you're following Baltic traveling down a river, as he's traveling away from town, the illustrations are driving you east to west. And I only have an electronic copy of Beatrice and Bear, so I apologize for my low quality images that I may be showing. But with that, you're going there's a lot of Beatrice and Bear that's going north to south. You have those birch trees that are looming in the background. And when you see, even in that cover, when you see Beatrice and Bear, Bear is so much taller that, it really gives you the idea of a height difference of up and down, up and down. Oh, I had an illustration saved and my phone did not move it through. There's a globe that you're just looking at that also has that up and down line.
Well, and that is a design choice, and it's something that actually was made in conjunction with the editor or the art director and the book designer, because Little Dog Lost is a story. That's the way the picture books work. They always work from left to right, right? You're always going in that direction. Little Dog Lost takes place mostly in the river. So it made sense to make it an horizontal size, like you said, so that when you open on those pages that show the river, you have that long spread. You can think of it as a river. Other books that sometimes are about the seas the same way. They're trying to show the expanse of the river, so the horizontal fits better. With Beatrice and Bear, it was, I think what we were trying to do is actually show the difference in size between Bear and Beatrice. So we went for the vertical choice. And that's a choice that is not, I think some illustrators may come up themselves, but I think a lot of times they come up in conjunction with a publisher, because they bring their expertise and they kind of see it. It's actually great to have other eyes looking at your work and saying, this would fit better in a vertical format.
Yeah, and anyone who's ever planning to create their own picture book, you have to realize that it's a collaborative process. It's your baby, but it's also many other people's babies.
And that's actually a good thing, really, because if you do it all on your own, you cannot help but get a little bit tunnel vision as your work. Mm-hmm. And having the help of editors, art directors, book designers, they bring their experience and their expertise and their own enthusiasm. They're really excited to be working in the book with you. So everyone wants the book to succeed and wants it to be the best book it can be. So it's really, I think it's important if you want to work in picture bookmaking or any sort of publishing, you really need to be open and be flexible to look at your story and sometimes think of what if we tried this, what if we tried that, because everybody's in the same team. We're all trying to make the best story.
Right. Yeah. But you kind of have flipped the switch now with there's a lion in the forest, which again, you have to do the point when you say the title, because now you're not going east or west or north or south. Your white space, which it's for people listening, is the amount of white around the illustrations, is so different. Your eyes really jumping around the page as you're looking to either find a little flash of orange as you're trying to find this lion, or you're really captivated by the greens and purples of the jungle and you just see the lushness of the page.
Well, let's get into There's a Lion in the Forest then. So let me show the inspiration for that was this little guy. So this is the golden lion Tamarin, and he's such a beautiful animal. And what's so unique about him or her is that they live only in Brazil. They exist only in Brazil and only in the Atlantic forest, which is not the Amazon. It's actually the forest that starts along the coast and goes inward. And they get their name from that beautiful reddish orange fur and mane that they have around their face. And when I was growing up in Brazil, there was a lot of talk about golden lion tamarins because they were very much endangered. In the 1970s, there were about only 200 of them left in the wild. So that was a big concern because should golden lion tamarins disappear from Brazil, they would basically disappear. They would basically go into extinction. So I actually have a picture here because I'm going to get a little bit away from picture book, but one really big thing that happened is that Brazil 2 years ago created their first wildlife overpass. And the idea is to be able to connect two separate parts of the Atlantic forest so that golden lion tamarins can travel between them and be able to continue to grow. The numbers now are much better. They're still endangered, so they still need protection. They still need our protection, but from about 200, there's about close to 3,000 of them now. And how this came about was through a lot of cooperation between Brazilian scientists and scientists all over the world, nonprofit organizations, and zoos all over the world. And here in the US, including our own Philadelphia Zoo, joint efforts to raise golden lion tamarins and help reintroduce them into the wild. So this little guy just brought, I always thought about golden lion tamarins. I remember growing up with the campaigns for saving the golden lion tamarins. And one day I was just drawing animals and I was thinking of them. And I drew went too far. I drew this little guy. And I thought, I wish I could write a book about a golden lion tamarin. I just like the look of him. And I immediately imagined a speech bubble that said, I'm a lion. But I didn't really know what the story would be like. I just thought that, he's a good character. And how could that become a story? And it was only when I did another sketch, and this time it was a sketch of a toucan, and I thought of the line, toucan heard it first. And that's when the pieces started kind of coming together. And I thought maybe what's going to happen is this golden lion tamarin is just playing around at being a lion. And the animals are going to start to get worried because they think there's a lion in the forest. So I had these two characters. I had the golden lion tamarin and I had toucan, but I needed more. So I had to find other animals that live in the Atlantic forest that could be other characters. So of course, the next animal that I think of was capybaras, because they are just the coolest animals there are. They're really sweet. They love being in the water. This little bird is the Brazilian tanager. It's a beautiful black and red book with just a tiny little bit of white on his beak. The coati. At first, actually, I thought of using an anteater, but then I discovered coatis. I didn't discover them, of course, I knew about them, but I just found more pictures of coatis that I thought they would make a better character. And of course, the jaguar, who is the biggest cat in South America. So now I had all the characters, and I had that beginning of the story, that first line, toucan heard it first. And that's when I moved into writing. So I started writing the manuscripts. And again, you do it several times, trying to refine the story. I was already thinking of page turns and how that would work. I think in this first one, I started right away with toucan heard it first, but there's still, things still change from there. I just kept on. And as I do this, at the same time, I work on the thumbnails. And they're very rough. You can, I just kind of trying to think of how, again, the story would move from page 1 to page 32. Yeah. When I had this and I had the manuscript, I submitted that to my editor to see if this would be something that she would be interested in, if this story would be something that she would like to publish. Mm-hmm.
So really, you just needed to present her with the manuscript, and even though you're saying the thumbnails are rough, although I think they're just gorgeous, it's enough for her to see the way your brain is operating. Yes, and I think it's because we have worked together on 2 other books. So I think if I was approaching a brand new editor, if it was brand new, I'd probably do something a little more polished. But because she already knows how I work, and from the previous 2 books, it was okay for me to just show something that is not very polished for her to see, just to get her to check on her interest. Is this something that she would like to pursue with me? And actually, it was funny. It was not funny. It was really great because she liked the story. She wanted to work together on this book and show it also to the art director, Cecilia Young, who is terrific. And I had a really great conversation with Cecilia, because when she saw this thumbnails, she felt that the art was not enhancing the story as much as it could. She felt that it needed more. I actually wrote down, because she said some really great things. She said that I needed to take better advantage of the story structure and pacing by building up the escalation of tension in the story. So with that advice, I went back to create a better storyboard to see if I was able to capture if the art was able to capture better the intensity of the drama in the story. So I started working on something a little bit more polished, which is this. So there's still sort of thumbnail style, but bigger. Mm-hmm. And now I can put a little bit more detail, and I can start putting the space where I think the text is going to go. And it's so funny to see, because I can recognize scenes from the book that just made it immediately from here. Like your first image of the capybara jumping out I
That's
think it's
right.
almost exactly the same.
Exactly. And that's what's kind of some fun. Some things stay exactly the same. Others, got changed or got sometimes a little bit of changing perspective. But this now, as you can see, it's more polished, and they could see what I was thinking of doing and how I was trying to show that escalation of the, pretty much the panic that the animals were feeling. So once I showed that, I got to go ahead, and that's when I switch. I'm going to switch quickly here. I'm going to show you the dummy, because this is still just a storyboard, a more detailed storyboard. But then I moved into the dummy.
Digital dummy or physical dummy?
Digital dummy. So far, all my dummies have been digital, because I guess that's the new way to do things. And you can still do it physical if you want, but it has been all digital. I know you probably miss it, right? Miss the.
I'm missing the real. Before we go on though, I think we should.
Sure.
For people who may not know, a dummy is not an insult. It is the name for the mock-up that
exactly.
is like a rough version of what you would like the final artwork to look like, so that you and the editors can sit down and decide how are these colors playing, how's the placement of your animals or characters and so on.
Exactly. Usually when you get to the dummy stage, you are already trying to do the art on using the size that you're thinking of doing it. So for this one, again, because you have trees and we again went on a vertical idea for the pages. So they're actually the same. Lion in the Forest and Sleepover are basically the same size. We use the same diamond trim size for both books.
But no, I am going to ask you a question, because you said that this is done digitally, but
yes.
I know that when you work, you are not, your watercolor illustrations we see are actually watercolors. So are you watercoloring your backgrounds and then scanning them to make your dummy?
No, actually, when I scan a watercolor and place it in the dummy. So even though the dummy is digital, all the artwork is analog. So everything was a painting. And then because when you present a dummy, you're showing drawings, but in between you're showing some final pieces of art, just so you can see, you could start thinking about color. Like especially with my first one, with Little Dog Lost, that was a first book, so they had never worked with me. It's a way to show them, this is how my final art would look like. In this, again, because they had already worked with me, I wasn't so worried about making sure they looked exactly at the style, but I just wanted to show how the story would come about, with some pieces of color here and there.
Right.
So when I did the dummy, I just scan all the drawings, and I add the text. And so you can see here's that one, but like you said, is exactly, the same way.
I love your original dummy toucan. That look of terror on his face when he first hears the noise.
He keeps on getting more and more concerned as the story keeps on going. So this is the dummy. So I'll go back to the presentation. Let me go share and back to you. So now I'm going to talk about that thing you said about the art looking a little different. I love white space, and for me, I would use a lot white space, but this story needed a dense, the story takes place in the Atlantic forest, in the Mata Atlântica, and that's a very dense forest. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to do the backgrounds, because some pages needed to be full bleed. And by full bleed, you mean that both pages, the double spreads, the art goes all the way to the edge, right? Which is something that I don't normally do. I do in my previous books, you see some of them, but they're not as much there. And this one had more of it.
Right.
And one thing that we had concerns, so here I'm just kind of playing around with that same page of the first page, which ended up not being the first page, but it's the start of the story with Toucan. I was trying to see how can I do the background. And this is again a way where I was trying different things, and I realized with the help of the art director again and the editor, that maybe only the animals should have a line of ink, and the background would only be watercolor and color pencils to allow the animals to pop a little bit more. But even with this understanding, I still couldn't figure out how to do the background. We were out one day, you and me and Adrian, another author illustrator that is a big friend, and she said something that is true. The background, the forest is almost like another character.
Right.
And I never had kind of worked on being that much concerned about the background. So I kept on trying, and I still didn't like it. I just felt I just didn't know how to do it. And I was kind of getting a little impatient trying to come up with because sometimes if I try to do a little bit, even without the line, if I try to do a little bit more full and realistic, the animals will get lost. You wouldn't really get the animals. So finally, I came up with a more stylized way to do the background. And that's the way that it ended up being in the book. So
I'm going to ask you a question, and this is a loaded question because I think I know the answer, and I think you are potentially going to get very angry about this. When you're doing these and you're inking, are you inking? If we've seen maybe 5 versions of Toucan here sitting and looking off to the side. Are you doing ink every time, or are you using a photocopy of your ink work to keep that in place and change your backgrounds?
I do both, but the problem is that when I do the photocopy, the paper is not really suitable for watercolor.
Right.
So it doesn't really work. So I've done it sometimes just to think of using different colors. But in this case, every one of these were done on watercolor paper. So I had to redraw and redo it, every time to try to come up with. And I still sometimes, the thing about I can still think of different ways to do things, but finally I came up with it. So I think being able to do some work digitally is really helpful, because this is a lot of work to keep on going over and over. I don't have it, but I hear that you can buy these large printers that you can print watercolor paper on them. So this is the way that you can, and that's actually a great idea, because when you work with lines, sometimes if you're not worried about doing the final art, you tend to be a little looser and more, on your sketch lines. And then when you're trying to transport that into the final art, you can't help but you tense up, and then your line doesn't come up as nicely. So
there's a lot to break down in there, so I want to make sure that people appreciate like all the things that you just said. So the first thing is with the paper, the difference between a watercolor paper and a regular paper, having to do with the quality and the texture to be able to hold and carry that the water and the pigment across the page. Super important. But the other point that I think, the tight versus loose, which is, every illustrator you ever talk to talks about being too tight when they're doing final art. Can you explain to everyone what tight and loose mean?
Oh yeah, it's just, it's amazing that it happens to everyone, because it's just, there's something that clicks in your brain when you think, okay, now what I'm doing is going to be the one that has to be perfect. And that just makes it, when you're just drawing without worrying, you just do things in a way that you're not concerned about how expensive the paper is or how many other times you're going to have to do it. You're just trying to come up with the idea and that loosens up your hand, and your brain. You just kind of do it without concern that it has to look perfect. And even if you feel very confident in your skills, when you're looking down at an expensive watercolor paper page and thinking that this is the one that has to work, you just are not able. You cannot make your hand work, in that same freestyle. You just tense up, and it's really upsetting. It's really hard. I mean, there's an illustrator that I love very much. 2 illustrators that I love, Betsy Lewing and Matthew Cordell. I remember reading both of them sometimes use this system where they will just work on the sketch and then they will print it on watercolor paper on this. They have this printer that will print the lines on watercolor paper. And what that means is that they keep the freshness of their line. And if when they're painting, something goes wrong, they just print that again. And you can have this, you don't lose your lines. You don't lose, because that happened every time in my books, Little Dog Lost. If I messed up a page and I had to redo it, I would be like, oh no, but the dog looked better on the other one, oh, this looked better. It's just, you can never reproduce, exactly. So that is, I don't really have a printer that works that way, but that is, if your medium is ink or pen and ink or brush and ink, it's a great idea to be able to keep that fresh line and not, suffer so much as you work, as you redo the pages over and over again, because
right.
The line will remain.
Yeah, sorry for triggering you if I
But that's
did
okay.
about printers.
You can see the tension.
I know you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about that elusive printer that can print on watercolor paper since it's so much thicker.
Yes,
but
there is. Matthew Cordell, I think, was the one that recommended this printer, but it's an epson printer, but I don't think they have it anymore. It's a very large printer. And the problem with these printers is that, at least when I tried one of them, is that you have to be, I'm not a full-time author illustrator. You have to keep on using it all the time, or, remove the ink, which I never did. So what happens is that the ink would get stuck, would get dried up. And then every time, I'm not exactly sure how Betsy Lewin did, but she did a number of books. I'm not sure if she had like a very large printer that, I can just do it. But that is like the dream, if that's your medium, to not have to worry about redoing your lines and being free to use lines that come up, when you're not worried about the final art.
Right. And so when you're doing it, so we see that we have the final lines around Toucan. The background is completely lineless, so that it has a softer blur into the background. And then you've gone over it with pencils.
Exactly. So that's how I did it. So this is a page of the final book. So you have Toucan has the black outline, and then everything else is just watercolor and then color pencils. And let me see. I think that's it for my presentation. Then what I had next was just the page, the cover for the book. And then the first few pages where, you do the There's a Lion in the Forest really well, because that's basically the way that, the panic's supposed to be growing. So, there's a lion in the forest, and it starts: deep in the Atlantic forest of Brazil, a new sound traveled through the trees. Go, go. Toucan heard it first. It was deep. It was growly. It was a deep, growly growl. That could only mean one thing. There's a lion in the forest. And that's how it keeps on growing.
I think it's so wonderful. It is definitely designed for story times, either if it's in someone's lap or if it's with an entire group. I think you have, there's so much possibility for someone who really gets into telling stories, if it's a librarian or an educator or a caregiver, to have just so much fun with all of this.
Yeah, I think this does really do well in read alouds. I agree. It's just
fantastic. I'm gonna hit you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I just realized I forgot I had a page at the end of this book. Even though, again, it's a fictional story, I always try to put some informational pages. And in this time, I wanted to highlight the animals of the Atlantic forest. So I give a little bit of information about all the animals, and in particular, the golden lion tamarins, and all the efforts to preserve and to keep them from becoming extinct. And that was it. That was my ta-da.
We're coming near the end of our time, but I have a series of very difficult questions for you to end with, now that you're relaxed. The first one is for people who are looking to get into writing or illustrating their own children's books, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting off on this journey?
The first advice I would give is to read. If you want to do picture books, read as many picture books as you can. And I think that's really critical. Not just picture books from before, from when you were little, but read picture books that are coming out now, so you can learn what's being published and how, not to follow trends, but to see how picture books are being made, how the stories are being told, and how page turns work. Just read as much as you can. And secondly, also important, I would recommend that you join the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's this very large national organization that is open to anyone, published or pre-published. And what they do is they have local chapters everywhere. So there's a local chapter here for Easter, Pennsylvania. They have national events, but they also have these local events put together by your local chapter. And they are terrific. I would go to the Illustrator Day. There are also events where you can hear editors speak, our director speaks, agents speak, and they talk about, you just learn, because writing picture books is both a joy and fun, but it's also work. It's also a business. So you're trying to, you need to learn about both things at the same time. And they offer great resources. So these two things, it would be my first advice, to really go into your public library, take 10 books at a time and read them, and then check them back and get more, and join the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.
It's a mouthful, SCBWI.
Yes. SCBWI.
They also provide prompts, don't they? And they will provide times for members to now virtually get online and you're carving out an hour to sit and write together or sit and illustrate together. So it does help you stay focused and get onto a schedule of working to get through. And the hardest question that I have for you today is, I mentioned earlier that you are a hot chocolate aficionado. Where is the best place in Philadelphia to get a hot chocolate?
I do love hot chocolate, and I will drink them year round. Doesn't matter if it's summer, I'll keep on drinking hot chocolate. And I think one of the best hot chocolates in town is at this French bakery called, I don't speak French, but it's called Jam. So it's J apostrophes A AIME on 13th Street, and they have really one of the best hot chocolates. It's fantastic. Also near me here in Old City. So yeah, you're gonna have to stop me. There's a wonderful bakery called Icy, and they also make a killer hot chocolate.
Well, then it's great, because now people who are local have places to go and maybe bump into you, and people who are watching from around the country, around the world, if they ever visit Philadelphia, they have some suggestions.
They have some hot chocolate places to go.
We have a question from the audience, which is, where is the best place to purchase a copy for the book?
Well, actually, I would say right now, if you want a copy to be signed and personalized, I would direct you to Children's Book World. Children's Book World is a bookstore here in the Philadelphia area in Haverford. It's a wonderful bookstore that has only children's books, and you can get a signed and personalized copy there, because I go there and do that. But it's actually available anywhere. I would always recommend your local indie bookstore. I would also recommend going to your library, because as a librarian, I'm a big proponent of checking out books from the library. So you can also use your library. You can see if the library has your book, my book.
That's great. That's great. We're near the end. We'll pause for a moment. If anyone else has a question, you can either put it into the chat or into the Q&A to ask. And if you don't, you can always email us at clrc@freelibrary.org, and we can pass along the question and get you an answer later, because
absolutely.
I know I've been in many webinars where 20 minutes afterwards, I think I should have asked that. Why didn't I ask that? So while we're waiting for that to take place, thank you so much for joining me this morning and for showing us all this beautiful artwork that you've created. Is there?
Thank you, Chris.
Any books on the horizon that you can drop hints about?
I am working. I have another book under contract with Nancy Paulson Books, which is very exciting. So I am in the process of working on some stories. So I'm at that time when I'm working on the words and the illustration and on the thumbnails. Not quite ready to share, but we'll see. We'll see if I come up with another story that is something that we both agree would work, and then I can go back to work. It's very exciting.
Remind everyone where they can find you online so they can see hints as they're being dropped.
Oh, you can find me online at let me put back my website, which is just my name. So it's www.monicacarnesi.com. I am not very good at social media. I do have an Instagram page and I will update it sometimes. I think some people are very good at doing that and others not so much. I'm in the category of not so much. But if as things come about, I will, when I have something to share, I will definitely put it up there too. But I think the best place to find me is at my website.
I just realized that I, in dropping links in for everybody, I've been dropping them to you and I have not been dropping them to everyone who's been watching. So I apologize, everyone. I'm putting them in now as we wrap up. And Monica, thank you again so much. This book is, I think, your work just gets better and better and better. And this one is just the top. I think it's lovely.
You're very kind. You're a great friend. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for this. This was a fantastic conversation.
No, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope we will see you in March when we talk to Amy Ignatow, who is a live wire.
Oh my God, you must. She is so much fun. She is the best speaker ever. You have to watch her. It's just...
We may have to install a delay so there's a beeper involved. I don't know. We'll see. No, she's a good time. Please join us.
She's great. She's hysterical and she's so talented. It will be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your morning. And thanks again, Monica.
Bye, everybody. Bye.